Well, a little boy was sitting with his grandmother one afternoon, watching her knit. And then he suddenly asked her, Grandma, do you know that how you and God are just alike? Well, the grandmother was a little bit perplexed by that, but she smiled and said, No, son, tell me how we're alike. He thought for a second and then replied, Well, both you and God are very old. And you're both always right. Not to leave out the grandfathers. Grandfather was sitting with his little granddaughter, and she was holding a mirror, looking at it, and then looking at her grandfather. And finally, she said to her asked her grandpa, said, Grandpa, did God make me? And he said, Of course, dear, God made you. And she went back to looking at her mirror and then looked back up at her grandfather. And she said, Well, grandfather, did God make you? Yes, honey, God made me, but he made me a long time ago. She went back to looking at her mirror and then looked at her grandfather again, and she simply said, Grandpa, God's doing a better job now than he did earlier. Well, let me see if I can get this to work. There we go. This is Grandparents' Day. It was a day that in 1978 that Congress designated that the first Sunday that followed the Labor Day would become the National Grandparents' Day. And that's thanks to a lady named Marion McQuaid of West Virginia. Now, Marion was a mother to, get this, 15 children and 40 grandchildren. That's right, 40. She knew firsthand that the autumn years of life still bear fruit. So she lobbied for 5 years with Congress to get them to pass this day that would honor all grandparents. And if you'd humor me for just a minute, I'm not going to ask you to stand, but if you're a grandparent, would you raise your hand? That may be a little over half of us. If you're a great-grandparent, would you raise your hand? Well, that is very surprising to me. You have quite a few great-grandparents. Now, one more thing. If you're a grandchild, raise your hand. It's all of us. Though not all of us are grandparents, all of us are grandchildren. To be a grandparent is part of God's grand design, pun intended on this one, for the family. In the beginning, God told man to be fruitful and multiply and to populate the earth in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. Contrary to some, man is not a parasite or a blight to this planet, but rather he is the caretaker of it all. The earth was created for man and not man for the earth. Everyone here has grandparents. Without them, human life would cease to exist. There are some quotes that I want to show you coming up that help demonstrate just how special grandparents are. Grandparents, like heroes, are as necessary to a child's growth as vitamins. We should all have one person who knows how to bless us despite the evidence. Grandmother was that person to me, so said Phyllis Thoreau, who is a well-known author and teacher. A child needs a grandparent, anybody's grandparent, to grow a little more securely into an unfamiliar world. Some of the best educators are grandparents. And then one last one, and one of my favorites. The simplest toy, which even the youngest child can operate, is called a grandparent. How true do we know that to be, correct? I'd like to give you about 4 statistics here when it comes to grandparents. 63% say they can do a better job of caring for their grandchildren than they did with their own offspring. That's because practice makes perfection, right? Secondly, 72% feel that being a grandparent is the single most important and satisfying thing in their life. I found this quite interesting, but it goes along with one survey that was done to find the happiest age group, whether it was the 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s. The happiest people, according to the survey, were people in their 70s. Maybe it's because they're fulfilling what they believe to be their greatest role here. 90% today enjoy talking about their grandkids to anyone who will listen. Now, actually, I thought that would be a little bit higher. I am not in that group, I just want you to know, but I do have my 3 grandchildren over here to the right if you want to see some very pretty ladies, just to let you know that. But I'm not in that. And then finally, and this, young people, you need to listen. Baby boomer grandparents control 75% of our nation's wealth. You want to be on that inheritance list of your grandparents. And it's scriptural. Proverbs 13, verse 22 says, a good person, listen to this, grandparents, a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. So my kids, I'm skipping over you and going straight to the grandkids. Now, grandparents are our storytellers. They're our secret keepers. They're our cheerleaders. And sometimes our co-conspirators when we want that extra cookie that Mom said we couldn't have. They are the gentle hands that held us when we cried, the wise voices that guided us when we were lost, and the warm hearts that loved us unconditionally. We give them unique and silly names that hold the dearest meaning and the utmost respect, such as Grandma and Grandpa, Nana and Pa, Meemaw and Peepaw, Mamaw and Pawpaw, Gigi and Papa, Nene and Pops, and Boo Boo. I had a cousin who called his grandmother Big Mama. She loved it. Though I don't know if the grandmothers of today would really appreciate that name. Grandparents wear many hats by passing down family traditions and tales that connect us to our roots. They are our teachers, offering lessons not found in textbooks, lessons about resilience and kindness and the importance of a good long nap. And they are nurturers, always ready with a hug, a home-cooked meal, or a listening ear. I know that when I first started dating Denise and we'd go over and visit her grandmother, you couldn't go to her house without being fed. There was always fresh garden corn cooked, ready to be eaten once you arrived, whether that was morning or night. But I didn't care much about the corn. What I had my eye on was that she always had a homemade chocolate pie topped with real meringue made with fresh eggs that always sat on her stove top. I could have easily have eaten the entire pie. Our grandparents have lived through decades of change, through wars and revolutions, through moon landings, and even TikTok trends. And yet they remain steady beacons of love and wisdom. Their stories remind us that life is just not about the destination, but the journey itself. And they have taken quite the journey. Grandparents teach us the value of perseverance, the strength of forgiveness, and the power of love. They show us that aging isn't really about growing old. It's about growing wise. They remind us that laughter is still the best medicine, and that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is with a good story and a glass of tea or a cup of coffee. They are living proof that love does not fade, it deepens. That family isn't just about blood, but about connections. They teach us that the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but rather values, traditions, and love. My grandma Newby started a tradition when I was a little kid. On Friday night, she would make hamburgers. Now, that may not sound much to you, but with 5 kids in my family, my mother made for lunch and supper, Monday through Friday, beans and potatoes, pinto beans and boiled potatoes. And that's what we had for every meal. There was no change, except on Sunday we'd get chicken or a roast. But on Friday nights, Grandma Newby started making hamburgers. And she was just a couple of blocks down the road and we could walk to the house. Those hamburgers were such a nice change that hamburgers became then and now still are my favorite food. But as Newby got older and we got bigger and hungrier, Mama took over that tradition that Grandma Newby started and started cooking burgers. Well, as teenagers, our friends found out about Mama cooking burgers on Friday night, that she would fry up in an old cast iron skillet and then put the buns on top and put a lid over and let the steam and the grease from the hamburgers. I know you health nuts, you're crazy about this right now, but let those buns soak up that grease, and then she'd put cheese on them and serve them to us, and oh wow, we thought we were in heaven, or at least as close as you could get to it on earth. And Mama would keep frying hamburgers till we were all full, or she ran out of hamburger meat. And nearly every time she ran out of hamburger meat. My older brother and I, well, we would eat at least 2, and there's 3 more kids behind us along with our friends. And then it got to the point my older brother and I decided we'd start trying to eat 3 hamburgers at a time. I still think about that today. And even though my grandmother's gone and my mother's gone, every year we get together at a state park in Tennessee on the month of June, just like we did this past June. And my siblings come and camp out, and on a special Friday night, we will invite other family members who are not camping but nearby to come and join us for Friday night hamburgers. This past June, we served hamburgers to 57 newbies. That's an awful lot of newbies. But it's all because of the tradition started by my grandma Newby. I want to talk to you quickly about the roles of parents and naming just 3 of those. There's many roles, but I just want to name 3. First of all, grandparents are storytellers, and they are our historians who teach us our history, our family history, not just the world's history, but our family's history. They carry the resilience that comes from living the challenges and the changes and the perspectives that help the rest of us see the bigger picture. It was through my grandmother that I learned that I had a great uncle who started a college in our hometown of McMinnville, Tennessee. Population when I left it many years ago, 12,000. Not a big town. But he started this college of photography. And if you go to the Smithsonian Institute today and look at the photography part of it, you will find portraits that my great uncle did, because he was the first one to produce a camera to make life-size pictures. Amazing. And if it had not been for my grandmother, I would not have known that about our family history. In Psalms 145, verse 4, the psalmist says, "One generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts." Grandparents recount God's faithfulness through family history, through the baptisms, through the healings, through the answered prayers. My great-grandfather was an elder and a song leader. And thanks to my grandma Newby, I have the tuning fork that he used over 80 years ago to pitch the songs that he led. So when I lead singing, I think about him from time to time, though I don't use that 80-year-old pitched fork. Second of all, the role that grandparents play is that of teachers. In Deuteronomy 4:9, it urges us to remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Parents, grandparents pass on wisdom. They teach us how to work hard, play fair, and keep the faith when life gets tough. How many times did you learn invaluable lessons from your own grandparents? My grandfather during the summer would take me and let me do paintings. No, not picture paintings, but painting houses, the walls inside and out. And he taught me how to paint. He taught me how to hold a paintbrush. There's a right way and there is a wrong way, and how to cut into walls and to get a smooth and quick line. Don't like painting today, but he taught me a lot. Encouragers. They perform that role of encouragers. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, and this is a verse we hear quoted many times where Paul is talking to Timothy, and he said, "I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also." A grandparent's blessing can embolden a grandchild to step into God's calling. It was through my grandparents that both my parents obtained their faith and me through them. Legacies and lessons. Let's quickly look at 4 legacies that our grandparents leave us. The first one is that of patience. Our grandparents know life's best things often take time. They seem to have an extra measure of patience that they did not have when they were just parents. Years of experience have taught them the need for patience. Perhaps this is why we prefer at times to speak with our grandparents rather than our own parents growing up. Because our grandparents, we knew they had enough patience to truly listen to us before jumping to conclusions. Secondly, faithfulness. Commitments are worth keeping. Being faithful to your word, to your cause, to your beliefs. My grandfather made trades and agreements with others with just a handshake. I learned from him that your word is your bond. And once given, whether or not you have signed a piece of paper, you must honor your word. I learned of my paternal grandfather walking miles on foot because he owed a debt to an individual. He did not have a car, but he owed the man money, and he walked several miles just to make sure that that person was paid. My grandmother would never miss a church service, even if sick. She worked when she was sick. She came to worship when she was sick. I know it's different today, but that's the way they were back then. They just didn't give up. They had that persistence. She also believed that if you didn't get to the church building at least 30 minutes before church started, then you were late. We're definitely past that nowadays, are we not? Perspective. Our grandparents give us a different perspective than what we would normally have without them. They remind us that most storms, well, they eventually pass. My grandparents survived the Great Depression and then World War II. They understood what it meant to have very little and what it meant not to have everything that they needed. They understood that you could not waste anything. Recycle and reuse were not words just to be used to impress, but rather they were necessities for the survival of their lives. My grandfather served during World War II on a destroyer ship. He didn't just talk about freedom, he fought to preserve it and to protect his family, his wife and 2 sons back home. A kamikaze pilot crashed his plane into Pa's ship, blowing it up. I think of my grandfather's perspective as he treaded water filled with the burning oil from a sinking ship and the spilled blood of those who did not make it. He was one of the fortunate soldiers who somehow survived, but that incident forever changed his life. And then grandparents show us and leave us a legacy of joy. They laugh not because life is always easy, but because joy is a choice. It is not dependent upon the circumstances around it, because there are things you simply cannot control, but you can control your reaction to them. They believe that, and they teach us that as well. I remember my grandparents taking us to visit people on a Sunday afternoon because it was a pure joy to do so. There was no TV, no radios, no smartphones, just face-to-face conversation, and always everyone laughed. Grandparents are good listeners because their age group has the longest attention spans if you're a baby boomer. They are over half the attention span of millennials, and they are more than 3 times the attention span of Gen Z. You want someone to listen to you, truly listen to you, go to your grandparents. And then a call to honor. Exodus 20, verse 12 commands, honor your father and mother, but this it extends to your grandfather and your grandmother as well. And it's just not about respect in words, but also in actions. 3 things, first, that I'd like you to consider if your grandparents are still alive. First of all, if they are still alive, consider yourself very blessed. You need to spend time with them, is the number 1, and listen to them. Ask for, secondly, and record their stories, because once they're gone, the stories will be gone too, unless you've captured them yourself. You will regret it years later, like I have, failing to ask all the questions that I should have. And I want you to pray for them, their health, their well-being, and happiness to the Lord daily. Proverbs 16:31 says, gray hair is a crown of splendor. It is attained in the way of righteousness. And John Henderson read from Psalm 71, even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God. Most grandparents are older. Well, they are always older. Some are not as old as what they used to be, and some are much older. But you need to understand the great blessing that you have in your grandparents. I was at a grandparents' day Friday for Kyla. And there was a grandparent there, a lady who had a t-shirt on with one of those cute little quotes. And it was so good I had to write it down. It said, being a grandparent doesn't mean I'm old. It means that I am blessed. This is one of the harder lessons that I've had to speak. Right before church started, Denise received a phone call that her mother and my children's last surviving grandparent had passed away this morning on Grandparents' Day. And as I thought about it, I'm thinking perhaps that's fitting. She loved children. That's why she was called Boo, because she would pick children up and go, "Abu, Abu." And as a young man who just entered in the family and was the new son-in-law, I didn't want to call her Betty because that was too informal. And I didn't want to call her Mrs. Northcutt because that was too formal. And so I started calling her Boo. And the kids call her Boo and Boo Boo. And the grandchildren call her Granny Boo. If your grandparents are alive, young people, don't waste the opportunities that you have now to be with them. If you are a grandparent, then you are blessed. And if your grandparents are still, if your grandparents are still alive, then you're one of the more luckier people on this planet. You are doubly blessed. Do not let this blessing pass by, because grandparents are a blessing to us all. Now, this lesson has not been about salvation, but maybe here and you thought about your grandparents and you thought about the faith that they have, and you realize it's time for you to follow in their footsteps, to obey the Lord, to believe that Jesus is the Son of the living God, to repent of your sins, to confess, and to be buried in baptism for the remission of your sins. Or you may be someone here and you said, you know, my grandparents were faithful, but I've kind of gone away. I want to be more like them. I want to learn the lessons. Now, I understand that not everybody has the same grandparents, but we need to be thankful for grandparents. And maybe if it's not your own grandparents, maybe it's someone else's grandparents that you've looked up to and admire. But if you have a need, we're going to provide the opportunity now while together we stand and while we sing.